Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another Supercoach Insider podcast. My name is Swizz, and we are going through our Supercoach team discussions. And today we have the Brisbane Lions, and of course, my co-host is with me, Brisbane Premiership supporter. I can say that now. Ben, how are you, mate?
Swizzy, hey mate, look, how times have changed. You're hosting me for a time. I mean, some people didn't say I was versed, but look, apparently you can top and bottom. So look, here we go. I just had a massage. I didn't think I could be as relaxed as I am right now, Swizz, because how can you be stressed about talking about the Premiership team? And look, I've got the Premiership polo, my Premiership here, and I've even got a Premiership, if I can get it right,
Yeah, you've
lager.
got it.
Premiership lager, mate. I am all ready to talk about the Brisbane Lions. What do you got for me?
I love it. Well, before we jump into that, as always, and I'll do it today, check us out on all our social media platforms, in particular YouTube, Spotify. Get in contact with us via X, Supercoach Insider 100, which the man Ben looks after, and Swizz 26 for me directly. We always enjoy your commentary. So, yeah, send us a message, especially to do with the Brisbane Lions. Lions supporters out there, tell us what you think of today's episode. Now, we're going to start off by looking at the fixture. We've got the first 5 games there. The unfortunate thing with the Brisbane Lions is they are a round 0 opening round team, which is up against Geelong. So that game doesn't count. It's one less game we get for them in the Supercoach season. And they do have that bye in round 3, which is affected because we will get price rises or price drops leading to their bye. So for any potential rookies or mid prices, and somebody we will be talking about soon, they could change in value by the time they hit that bye. And then they've got a couple of nice little fixtures: Richmond at the G, the Dogs over at Norwood. Some tough double games as expected, being the premiers. So Geelong, who they beat in that classic prelim match. And the Swans, who they beat in the grand final. The Pies are going to be obviously a tough opposition. We think they'll be better this year. Hawthorn were the team in 2024 that everyone was getting hyped about. The Q Clash, naturally, they always get that twice. And the Bulldogs, who can be, they're always there and abouts. So there's no real easy games in those double games this year. So it is going to have.
Could I go as far to
Brisbane,
say, Swizz, as that we probably have the hardest double ups possibly out of
100%. That
like,
you couldn't actually choose a worse
twice.
bunch. Yeah, you couldn't choose a worse bunch to get, but that's what comes with winning the premiership. So, yeah, there is no relief there at all. So if Brisbane are going to go back to back, they obviously came from a bit of the hard way last year. It wasn't like they were on top of the ladder. So they're going to probably have to do it again, because with that sort of fixture, I don't think they're going to finish top 2, but they're still going to be thereabouts because they've obviously got a quality side. Got anything else to add to that, Benny?
No, it's just that Collingwood, we expect with their inclusions to rise back up the ladder a bit more. Gold Coast are getting more mature as well, and for Q Clash, even if they weren't a top 8 team, they're still challenging in those Q Clashes anyway for the pride sense of it, and so it's going to be even harder on that element. But yeah, it's going to be cracking. So I mean, on the positive side though, is that those matchups all quality opponents, which means that, if we are playing them away, then obviously we're going to get that home game as well. So we know Collingwood sells out all the time, as well as, Geelong gets a good crowd at the Gabba, and Hawks, etc. So I'm really excited for this season. The only downside about the fixture is that there's not many night footy. Like Hawthorn have absolutely hogged Thursday, Friday nights. We get our Easter Thursday, which we always get, and they go, "Hey, here's a night game. Thank you so much. That's your quota done." But for me, it works out well, though, because my wife works Thursday. So if it's a Thursday night game, it's hard for me to get to a night game because she works 12 hours, and then she works a Friday night. So it's also hard for me to get to a Friday night game footy. So I'm actually pretty happy that we do have a lot more Saturday, Sundays from a selfish point of view. But it still sucks because who doesn't want to watch footy at night?
That's early on because we don't know how those last sort of 7 rounds go. But I did see that. I think outside maybe the Bombers again for round 12, there was a period there where you had multiple Sunday games in a row. So kind of good if you are looking at kind of a Lachie Neale, Josh Dunkley type, and you want that backup captaincy. But not as good as, usually if you're looking for that more VC option. But yeah, it's interesting that that's the way the AFL decided to go. But maybe later in the year, you might pick up a few more of those Thursday, Friday games. In regards to the buys, as I said, round 3, also round 16, both of them very frustrating because they share the bye with Geelong. But that round 3, they with some very quality teams with Collingwood, Geelong, and Sydney, who we're also looking for our players in our starting lineup. And round 16 is the last of those mid-year buys. So you're usually trying to get your team finished by that round 16. So if you've got kind of a potential mid-pricer or a cash cow from Brisbane, easier if you can carry them that long, you can trade them out leading into round 16 to get one of those premiums that have already had a buy. But trying to bring in a premium makes it a little bit harder just because of that 16, Benny.
Yeah, frustrating, as you said, because the best window you're going to get is probably to upgrade to someone during the season. Especially if it gets a little bit closer to buys and you're like, I don't want to bring someone in with an early buy. You can kind of get someone towards the back end of the buy. But it really does come down to whether they're priced well enough at the time that you want to upgrade. Like that's the hard part with them. And I also find the Lions share a lot of Supercoach points as well, because we know, you have your like Adelaide, right? So you have Riley O'Brien taps it to his feet, kind of like what Wits used to do. Wits just used to go, hey, we don't want to get beaten on the outside, so I'm just going to tap it straight down, right? I heard MJ talking about it as well. Like pretty much they just tap it at the feet, contested footy, lots of stoppages, great for those that are going to get tackles, contested ball, and the rest of it. Lions, it's going to be interesting without Danaher as to what they do, because they like to play less disposals per goal, be really direct, hold possession of the footy. So it's going to be interesting to see if they try and play fast or whether they actually switch their style up a little bit, because, without Danaher there, if you have a younger key forward, if you just bomb it straight and go direct, there's a chance of just ping pong straight out. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do with that. Speaking of interesting, Swizz, that best 22, it's debatable.
I was about to say it's a good segue into the best 22, or best 23 technically. But so I've got Dode, Payne, Starcevic, Zorko, Andrews. I've gone Wilmot just because I think potentially Kitty Coleman might not make that first side, depending on fitness, depending on how long term they want to go with him. But there has been a bit of debate on the Brisbane forums about that. Zach Bailey, Ashcroft, and McCluggage. You got Rayner. Now, I've gone Ryan, but you could throw darts at which key forward they'll go. Lohman, Charlie Cameron, Hipwood, and then Morris, the developing tall there. Big O, Lockie Neal, and Dunkley. We know that's set. And then interchange Coleman. Levi Ashcroft comes and joins his brother. It's going to be very hard to probably ignore him, even though I did in my first team reveal. Berry and Archie, and Ben's talked me out of. I dropped off Leicester and put Fletcher as the sub, but then again, Brisbane have such a quality squad. With injuries, players are going to get their opportunity, but you could probably put 4, 5, 6 players in that sort of sub interchange position that aren't there yet. Who do you else would like to add to that, or what are your thoughts, Benny, around that 23?
Oh man, it's trying to work out best 23 for the Lions is difficult. Now we have depth in every position except for maybe key forwards, key defense, and ruck, right? But if you lose a medium forward, if you lose a medium defender, if you lose a winger, if you lose a mid, it's interchangeable, right? To the point where it's scary on the fact that my consensus, where I've been talking online as well, is that anyone with an ACL, the Lions don't actually have to rush them back in. So Coleman with Dodie, McCarthy.
Levi Ashcroft, Lincoln McCarthy.
McCarthy, Gardner, etc.
Yeah.
When you have a look at it, so Dodie, Leicester has career best form. And if you watch the grand final, like I did, but he marks as that third tall, he was marking and intercepting exceptionally well. He was pushing off, he was actually taking daring kicks and leading and moving forward and linking up really well. They don't need Dodie straight away, even though it'd be great, and I still think he'd be best 22 if he plays. But there is a little bit of competition for that spot. Same as Coleman, you don't have to rush Coleman straight back in, because Zorko was doing his role very well. Maybe not as great defensively, right? However, on the attacking side of that halfback flank, he was kicking well, he was opening up, he was taking on the game and doing really well on the offensive side of it. So you don't even have to rush him back in. And then you got McCarthy. Well, hello, Lohman's popped up. So I actually don't think McCarthy is going to get a game this year unless there's an injury to a forward. And then you add Levi into the mix, which is just absolutely crazy. So the Lions can play multiple positions really well. You got Zorko can play that same role. He could also play a smallish forward or a half forward quite easily. He could pinch in the midfield if he needed to, if there was an injury mid-game or whatever. So he is very versatile. Zach Bailey, I give him a lot of crap, but Zach Bailey started to push onto the wing and even actually did really well halfback flank last year as well. And particularly towards the final series in that Geelong game, he was the one that I think caught a mark and then played on through 2 players, absolutely bombed it straight to, I think it was Charlie on the run. So he actually got back in the defensive line. Wilmot, I think, is definitely someone that can go wing or back there as well. You got Gardner. There's so many options. McCluggage can go outside. Rayner, like they're just so flexible. Where for me, it pretty much comes to, I think Bruce is going to struggle to get a game
Yeah, well, he played
because for
12
me,
games last year. Yeah, so
yeah. So if Dodie's in, then Lester I find hard to place. He could be a great sub because if he's out, you can just throw him in the back line. He's played a little bit forward before as well. He can play that way. But Jasper has to play. And Jasper has played sub a couple games this year. They'd probably prefer him over Bruce. So it's a really hard team to nail down, in my opinion, because it's they're just so versatile and they're really high quality. And the last thing I'm going to say, Swizz, before we get into obviously all the rest of it, where this fits in, and some people I know, like Abs Magic, right, doesn't have Levi in his team. I don't know if you've got him in your team, Swizz, but Levi was draftable 12 months ago. He would have got drafted last year's draft if he could. 3 years ago, he played as an underager with Will Ashcroft, and he played on like the halfback flank. He actually played as a defender a few years ago as an underager and still racked up like 17 to 22 touches as a defender. And then he's a goal kicking half forward flank that can go mid as well. It's super dangerous. I don't know who I'm worried about, to be honest. Like Robertson must be just kicking his teeth. He didn't leave 2 years ago. Like, but it's a quality squad outside of, Hitwood being a Hitwood, right? Outside of, Brandon Ryan and whoever else are going to use there. And maybe, Payne, if he goes down, we've got, poor man's Joyce. But outside of that and the big O, most of the goal kicking, the link up, the actual play, once it hits that ground, our team is sensational.
yeah, for sure. And it's it's kind of tough outside of those sort of key tools. How are you going to kind of beat Brisbane if the ball's on the ground? They're the best team in it. It's just that those teams that do have really good kind of backline structure, Geelong's probably one where they've had the experience of Stewart. You've got those kind of now the flair of sort of deconning, but they've been probably a settled backline for a long time. Can potentially hurt you the other way, just because it's going to be hard to kind of bomb in. You're relying a lot on Ryan, Hitwood, Morris to get the job done. And I think Danaher is going to be a huge loss there. But then maybe Fagan's kind of thinking, maybe it might be a bit of a scrappy ball coming in. Like there's nothing kind of wrong with that, and that'll keep Lohman and Cameron and Rayner all involved when the ball stays on the ground.
I think the Lions play a little bit more slow and methodical. Once you get past the, if there's an option open and they want to play it fast, they can definitely play fast if there's space, right? Whereas if it's a little bit slower, I don't think they're going to kick it as long and direct unless they're going to try and make it hit the ground and then lock it in. Because I think if they lock it in the forward 50, I think the Lions would back themselves in quite well. Whereas what they don't want to have it is they don't want to kick it long, have it hit the ground, and then just lose it. And I think that's probably going to be their biggest risk issue. So it wouldn't surprise me if they actually kind of tried to play possession because they set it up for it. In the grand final, even in the final series, play possession, kick mark, and then try and actually, if they have nothing on, put it in long, but at least there's a lot of numbers around there to, hey, let's lock it in, let's get to work, and we'll put pressure on, we'll tackle, we'll link up with our structured plays, and then we'll try and hit the scoreboard that way. So I think you might find a little bit more possession footy through various stages. But it'll be interesting. I think they have to change slightly because you can't replace Danaher and just play the same way because Danaher was never really beaten in a mark.
Yeah, and I think actually they might have to change a little bit because teams would have put all the work in over the preseason. Teams always copy the premiers, so to stay up there, you've got to adapt and come up with new ways of going about things. So I think they probably would have not done that as much if Danaher was still there, but they've been forced into it. So it'd be interesting in those early rounds to see what the Lions might come up with, and it might not be the sort of players we want. Maybe those first couple rounds, why they sort of try to work it out, and we might be blessed because the fact that they do have the round 3 bye, that potentially we get a 3-week look at them and maybe have your team sort of set up. We've talked about this in the past where maybe you could do one player in your team, and there's the same situation last year where maybe it's an Essendon or Hawthorn player who could come blistering out of the blocks with the view that you have that one trade there to maybe get in your Neil, your Dunkley, whatever, because that's kind of little run, the only time that's it probably looks positive maybe is the West Coast game beforehand, but then you've got Richmond, so the Doggies. There's a couple of winnable games in that sort of section after their bye. Obviously Collingwood is hard, but it's still at home, and the Saints aren't going to cause them as much trouble as maybe some of the other sides would. So, and then the Suns, all due respect, it is a Q clash, but the Lions have had their number for quite a number of years. So, and then I think it's North Melbourne. So that's probably the only period of time, if you want to talk about soft draws, that Brisbane kind of have. So I wouldn't mind owning a Brisbane player. It's just the problem is, can you cover them during the bye? We've seen in the past teams, now with the flex position, it is a little bit easier. So yeah, there is a little bit of thought around that period, because as the season goes on, as we've talked about those doubles, it does get dramatically harder once we sort of hit mid-season. We'll talk about Supercoach targets. You've already brought them up.
Add on, just to add on what you said there, Swizz, and on top of that, if you are looking at starting a premium, it's hard, I think, for that first buy round to start any of the premiums in those teams, because unless it's like a value premium, so like Bailey Smith, because otherwise, Coleman, you can kind of say he's a stepping stone. If you don't want to start Coleman, you could probably, one price rise isn't going to hurt you. So you could always make the adjustment after that fact. If you want to see 3 rounds, and sure, let him go up by one little price rise, you'll have the buy. And then if it looks like a must have, you can make some moves and free up some cash or do whatever you need to do. So, I mean, if you're going, like someone else, you might be able to sort of switch you out at that point, or get a price rise from a rookie and then throw some cash on it if you keep some cash. There is definitely a lot of options there, but Ashcroft, any of the other Collingwood players like Dacos and the rest of you, start to add 1 or 2 of them on top of, say, Bailey Smith, Callum Mills, Dodie, not Dodie, going into, say, Coleman and the rest of it, it quickly starts to add up. And yes, it's best 18 with a flex of out of 23 spots plus rookies, but the part I want to really stress, though, is that you used to kind of get away with it a little bit more when you had the buys and you go, okay, they're going to add so many more points per round. And then we get to the buys, and then you kind of make some moves because there's 6 teams with the buy and all the rest of it. And you kind of go, okay, if I plan it well, I might be able to make some moves and make some points. Whereas now the middle buy rounds are stretched thinner. So it's only 4 teams, and with 1 of 2, which means that you're not going to probably get as much advantage through those middle buys anymore, because most people will probably be playing 18 at least for every single buy round. So it's not going to be anywhere near as advantageous, which makes the earlier buys more risky, in my opinion. So I love Will Ashcroft, and I'd like to see where he goes. I love Lockie Neal, and I'd love to see if he can kind of keep on with the high averages. I love Dacos. Definitely love Dacos, but also, can I fit them in, or do I just look to try and upgrade them during that middle part? And it's a hard discussion, because primo versus primo, if one goes banging off, and we speak it, like, use Dacos as a big term, because I feel like Dacos will average more than Neal. Sorry, Brisbane owners. But he needs to average more points per game over the next best person you could have picked, up until the point where you might trade him in during that early part as a first or second upgrade. So it's the only way it really hurts if he prices you out and goes on a massive run of 140s. So where do you sit, Swizz, on premiums? Because we're about to get into, say, Neil Dunkley, Ashcroft, as to whether they're viable, but you also need to work out, is this person going to be a definite keeper or a top 10? Are they going to hurt me if I don't have them, compared to the price of hurting as far as a rookie score versus the premium score that they would have given you, and how many points that differential is?
Yeah, and it's a great question. Like when Supercoach first opened for the gold subscribers, I just sort of picked the team that I'd want without even considering any of the buys, and then obviously started planning it around our first release. And I might have had 15 players that had an early buy, just because they were the players I liked so much. And that round 3 buy is just awful, because as a lot of people still want to pick Dacos, which, granted, may be the best player in Supercoach this year. Holmes is probably the last year you get him as a defender, and it could be one of the better defenders. You've got the Swans players in, Mills. People are talking about Roberts. The Lions, there's a lot of options there in the Ashcrofts, Dunkley, Neal, potentially Coleman if he's there fit. So you kind of go through it, and you can sort of just get 10 from this round. So it's trying to balance how many of these guys you can potentially carry. And that's where I think I agree with you, where maybe somebody like Coleman's an easier one to leave out because they might be I want to see kind of how he fits back in after that injury. There's potential there if, say, the West Coast game, which is a worry for me, if the Lions were doing really well, is that somebody they go, okay, you can be subbed off early because we don't obviously want to risk you. So there's more question marks than I have answers for. So players that in this situation who have this early buy, and I have more questions than I can answer right now, I'm leaving them out. And then I'm happy to make the correction if it becomes such a point. Even if Coleman came out and went 100, 100, 100 to start off the year, he's like, at best case, it's going up 50K. It's not like completely priced up, because there's probably going to be somebody who's going to get injured, or somebody who's going to be like, well, that's a bust pick, I need to make the change anyway. And that's why I kind of also feel a little bit with Will Ashcroft. I think some people are still leaning to Clayton Oliver or a couple other players in that sort of 450, 500 range. Ashcroft's in that position where if any of them bust, you can actually go down to him with quite a lot of ease. And I'm not against starting Will Ashcroft because I think he's a terrific player. We saw what he did in the grand final. But just because, and I've said this in other pods, just because we've got the Supercoach targets there, that doesn't mean you have to start them in round one. But these are guys, and there's a few others that we haven't named there, that we at least want to keep on the list on. And these are sort of players at some point could potentially all end up in my team, depending on how fit they are in the role and their price. So, I'm kind of leaning towards maybe one or two of the Lions players at most. But for that whole round, as you said, you can't get too carried away, because there's going to be plenty of people who are going to avoid them. And if they score, similar, then they're going to be ahead, because, they're not going to have players missing in round 3.
Yeah, I think the interesting part as well is that it also, for me, depends on if we do play a little bit more contested ball and possession footy a little bit more, because that's probably been the biggest issue for the Lions in the last few years, is that they have played so direct that they're not getting the bigger Supercoach scores. Yeah, outside of, say, Lachie Neale, who was, but outside of him, there wasn't really anyone. And I'm actually thinking, imagine Lachie Neale running through this preseason going, oh, please, hopefully Ashcroft just starts off on an absolute heater, and then teams start tagging him. Because imagine that, like, Lachie Neale just gets tagged week in and week out, or at least accountable on most weeks. And then all of a sudden it gets to a point where Will Ashcroft starts getting tagged, and then Lachie Neale's going to go absolutely ham and remind everyone how clean he is at one touch, below his legs, linking up. It's going to be absolutely sensational. The one thing I do want to say as well is that the buy sucks because of the first one, mainly because of who they share it with. Right now, if I'm probably preferring to lean towards, and I'm going to segue this because we are talking about the buys, a Giants and a Suns player, as far as I'm not starting them in my squad, but because they play 2 rounds, so round 0, round 1, they have the buy in round 2, they actually then don't play again until round 3. So they're actually also another good player that you could probably, if you are going to make a correction and you pick a premium and say you start somebody and it looks like it's not going to work out, you could easily then adjust it to a Giants or a Suns player. So, Flanders, Whitfield, there's a whole lot of other mids like Green, whoever you're going through, Anderson, then all of a sudden they've just got the normal buy. And if it was a deterrent, they're the ones I'm kind of going, hey, I don't want them. I'm going to probably keep an eye on them and see how they're tracking in the preseason. But if I start with, say, a Jaden Short or whatever it is from last year, and he's just an absolute bust after his 120 round 0 score, thank you so much, Short. Yeah. But then if you're going to get off, then it's like, well, wonderful. Then there's 2 teams that are so early in their buy on that round 2 that I'm looking at, probably, if I was going to switch and adjust, if a premium doesn't look like they're a top 10 or they're not going to be a premium, I would then switch to probably one of those 2 teams before the Lions, Collingwood, etc. But yeah, it sucks. Like, there's plenty of quality Geelong players, Sydney players, Collingwood players, and Lions players. And I don't think you can start with many of them, unless you're going to fade, say, Callum Mills for another premium, which I would be probably more into. I know Callum Mills is great, and I know I want him in my side, and I have him in my side. But if I want to start a Dacos, then maybe I start Dacos and not Mills. And if I have to get Mills in a week later, then I'll do that. But at least that way it kind of buffers the buy ratio a little bit.
Yeah. All right, back onto the line. So let's go. We'll go the midfield premiums first. We'll talk about them, and then we'll get to the defenders. So we'll start off the top 2, Neale and Dunkley, mate. one average, like Lockie Neal, absolute superstar, averaged nearly 120 again for the season. Dunkley is as reliable as you can get in regards to games. Played the 23 games, slightly down on the average with the 100, well, pretty well 112. We can round that up. So both of them are Supercoach gold. Do either of them, even with that early buy, tempt you, or are they even players that at some point you would like to have in your team throughout the season?
Lockie Neal, if he gets to a good price point, is always attractive. So he might get tagged one game and drop a lower one. I also want to see how they come off after a shortened preseason as well. Like, he did have the injury, so would he have plantar fascia? Should be fine. Obviously, now he's had some time off it, but how does that actually impact it? How are the Lions playing without Danaher? Because if they start racking up more tackles, more contested footy, then Dunkley and Neal and Will Ashcroft's averages will go up, at least sort of 5 to 10 points a game. If they're getting a couple more tackles, a couple more contested balls, instead of it sort of, going over their head or going around them, they'll get a lot more chances to actually rack up. So I'm more interested. Dunkley, I love Dunkley as a player, but he's almost the selfless role player as well, because they'll give him jobs. I mean, he sat on Heaney in the grand final. He'll sit on other people and yes, win the ball if you want to, but also stop that person from getting it. So he kind of almost trails them through stoppages instead of trying to lead it himself. So he's kind of the really good defensive mid, whereas Neal and Ashcroft are a little bit more see ball, get ball, hunt ball, get on the outside. So I think Dunkley, it hurts him in that sense, but he still does really well. And I don't really see that changing because, he's probably the best defensive mid the Lions have got. And, Neal and Ashcroft can do their own for sure, but I think they have a bit more free reign to actually get loose. What do you think, Swizz?
Yeah, no, I do agree with that. Dunkley, yeah, it is definitely role dependent. Like we saw that game, against the Swans, which did hurt his average because at that point he was tracking at sort of more that 115. But he did throw in that 69. So there's always that worry. But geez, when he'll never get the attention because Neal's always going to get it first, and then potentially, either Ashcroft or McCluggage if one of them have got off the chain early. So that's where we had that period in mid-year where he did 340s in a row. Like that is ridiculous. So like if they thought that, maybe it's even like young Ashcroft, there's more of an opportunity for a learning curve by maybe, following one of these players around. That would be the only way I think I can sort of squeeze Dunkley in if I sort of saw that in preseason and they were like, okay, well, this is just part of Will Ashcroft's development, but most likely that's not going to be the situation because Dunkley's so good at it. I'd love to pick him because his best is up there with the elite, but it's just always that one or two games that just brings his average down to that sort of that top 10, 15 level.
Yep. And he missed a lot of goals this year. Last year, 2024, missed a lot of goals. So normally Dunkley, when he gets in the forward 50, even when he was at the Dogs, he was able to hit the scoreboard and convert really well. And 2024, he actually missed a lot to the point where, it got publicized and written up in the AFL.com. And then I was watching a game at the Gabba and someone's like, oh, Dunkley, he'll get this. I'm like, dude, did you not see the article? And then literally it was like out on the full sprays it. So if he tidies that up as well, which I think he could, and he's notoriously not a bad kick either. So I think there is a little bit of room for growth. But again, role dependent. It just depends on how the Lions play. So I can't say that anymore. I am watching the preseason. I'm watching the early rounds, which means, again, I'm sitting off these players to start just because I think there is room to change. And if they change it to a more Supercoach friendly sort of game style, then I'm all in. And I think you could have 3 players that all go 115 plus quite easily.
Yeah. The next two, we can put these two together. So they'll be put together for the rest of their career. That's the Ashcroft brothers. So obviously very different price points, very, very different at their career bit, but Will's still young, especially in footy terms, because he's had those injury interrupted seasons. But we saw once he sort of came back and hit his straps, ignoring what the finals and especially the grand final, but just those 3 games at the end of the season are 129, 92, 115. Like that's more where he's at than those sort of 50s and 60s when he was sort of just working back into it. Now, the question is at his price, we're not really picking him as a cash cow. Yeah, he's probably going to make 100K on that, no problems at all. But you're kind of thinking 441, you want him to become a keeper at least sort of compete inside that sort of top 20, pushing those top 15 mids, if not more. Just the question is, there's a lot of mouths to feed. Is there enough pie to go around that he can sort of, lift up and maintain that so he becomes that sort of regular player on our side?
And it's hard because there's so many mids that are averaging 115 plus, right? And if you're going to pick Ashcroft with the early buy, he needs to average 115 plus or better. And in order to really damage the competition, you're probably looking at 120 plus in order to, really stamp your foothold on the competition. And he needs to do it early. He needs to do it before people upgrade, and he needs to start off really well. Otherwise, what'll happen is, and we've seen it before, was it Ridley in years gone by? The more expensive they are, the slower the jump is in price, which means that people probably he could have a 3, 4, 5 round games of doing really well, and he'll still only cost you a low 500. Do you know what I mean? He'll probably go up to about 530, and then people start to jump on after sort of a few games, and then all of a sudden they've got him in their side as a cheap premium anyway. So it is a hard one for me. I kind of look at it going, well, do I need Ashcroft? Maybe. I mean, people look at Dacos and what he did in his second year and his third year. He's playing the midfield, so he's got the role, right? Clayton Oliver went 115 plus, I think, in his second year, which is kind of like what it'll be 2.5 years really for Ashcroft. Yeah. And he'll get the midfield. And he's clean. He also goes forward with possessions. There's a lot of meters gained in that. So I think he's definitely someone that can go 115. But that's just that buy. And also, like, I could go someone else instead for, it's not going to hurt you as much, right? Whereas your Butters and your Sarongs, if they go 120, 125, then they can hurt you. Not saying they will, but I'm saying that there's a lot more options to choose from, where it's pretty much how many points they're getting per week, what's their ceiling like. And the one thing I will say for Ashcroft, though, is as well, he does have the game style for a big ceiling game. So if it's best 18, which 1/3 of the season is, then those high ceiling scores could actually help you. And that's what I'm kind of looking at when I'm picking my premiums. It's not just about who ticks off the most boxes each week, because if we've got 3 or 4 rookies playing and they're going to get me 60, 70 points maybe a week, right? Or let's say 50 to 70, right? Then do I want a guy just going 100, 110, 120, 115, 110, 110? Or do I want someone that's going to bang out a 140 or a 150 now and then, and actually hopefully it lands on that best 18 week where I get the most advantage? Otherwise, I'm like, cool, I'm playing a rookie. That rookie spikes me a 70 or 80, or some weeks it sucks because that rookie gets you 100. And you're like, well, oh yeah, it's great because I've just covered my premium, but also, so if you don't have a premium, but if you're running someone that's just getting 110, well, you're not really getting much advantage. So I'm looking at big ceiling players that can just break open a best 18 round. I'll move into Levi. I think you have to start Levi. I think he's best 22. I don't think he's moving out of that best 22 at all, unless they're trying to manage him. But he is an exceptional talent. We're talking about one of the best drafts in a long time, and this person was highly regarded as number 1 pick a long way out. Plain and simple. And then if you're looking at going, oh, wow, what talent there is, and you're looking at, Lalore, and you're looking at Jagger Smith, and you're looking at, all these other players that are in that earliest part, like Draper, et cetera, then, or Phil O'Sullivan, it's kind of hard then to go, okay, well, hang on, you're talking about the best player in the draft at a discounted price going into a good team, and he's still going to be best 22. I just think you have to pick him. And I could be wrong. I could be wrong once the preseason games come around. However, he has trained with the Lions. He's worked hard with his brother. The one thing that people don't understand as well is that how driven the Ashcroft brothers are and were. When they were in high school, they would spend lunchtime running laps. What teenage kid do you find that at lunchtime they're going to go and knock out 3-4K around the oval and train? They're just absolutely driven. They are clinical and they are absolutely prolific with their footy use. So, yeah, for me, Levi is a damaging, more half-forward sort of I guess, Petrarca type, maybe midfielder, compared to, say, a Will Ashcroft that's more of the, in and under the ball-winning contested mid, So it's like a Petrarca type instead of an Oliver type kind of difference. That's how I kind of see the two brothers. One's a little bit more, can hit the forward scoreboard a little bit more.
Yeah, no, for sure. Like, and that was probably the thing when I did my first team. He probably just got squeezed out because I just had so many of those buys, and I was just like, okay, how can I like fit them back in? That was the main thing. So I sort of had to readjust as to move on a couple of those other guys because I just don't want so many of them. But at 185, he's going to put a lot of cash on that for us. And we've said in the past where a couple of these new recruits come in, and some of them even become keepers for us. They're just so good. Now he's probably not going to get the freedom that some of those North Melbourne players have in the past because he's got other players around him. But it does also take the pressure off because Levi can just come in, do his thing, play the role that he needs to do. He'll probably get some CBAs at some point throughout the season and just continue to develop through it, into the player that we know he's going to be. So, it's probably not. I think that does probably hurt his ceiling, but it probably helps his consistency.
Same. I think if anything, I'll look at whose mid-time could he take. He's not going into defense. Like Lions don't need him in defense. You have Coleman there. You've got Bailey going back there. You got Wilmont, etc. So he's not going defense, and it's not going to get the Dacos Sheasel effect where they just rack up the pill in a bad side. Sorry, Collingwood. So, when you look at it though, it's probably more off the bench, half forward flank. They could put him half forward flank. They could put him in the wing. And if anything, I would actually probably see he might go into the midfield instead of in those rotations. Instead of saying I'm throwing in Berry can just stay outside. Right. So instead of saying I'm going to throw in Berry, I'm going to throw in a Zach Bailey, you might just go, well, Ashcroft's going in. Because if he gets forward, if he goes CBA and he goes forward of center, running out of that square, do you know what I mean? I just think I'd rather that's probably the way they're going to go. And I think there could be those two people in that rotation. It won't be huge CBAs. He's not in the best sort of 4, right? But you might find him taking Bailey or Berry's CBAs.
The way I do see people not picking him is not only because of that early buy, but let's just say pre-season, if Jacob Smith, Sam Laidlaw, Fino Sutherland, Sid Draper are all looking mint and they're all, locked into their sights, because then it becomes how many of these high-priced premium young midfielders can you start off with? And I can see maybe there could be a squeeze out. Yeah, I get it, depending on how you're using your position, but how much kind of cash with these guys can you have sitting on your bench, or if you started, because I don't think we've got the forwards that we have to pay up for this year, so there is that little bit of extra cash that can be spent elsewhere with it. But at the same time, I kind of don't want to have 2 or 3 180 plus guys sitting on my bench if they all come on. I mean, it is a bit of a super draft, so that's probably the one thought in my mind where we might have a serious amount of young stars to pick from where we probably haven't had in previous years.
Yeah, I agree. I think the ones I'm looking at are the ones that probably have the role. So I think Jager, I think they'll work his way in there. He's fast, he's lighter. He provides him a little bit of speed on the ball because I think Carlton have been a little bit slower sometimes around those mid mixes. And I think Draper could definitely add some speed into the Adelaide mix, depending on how they kind of go with their setup as well. So
you're probably looking at 2 guys.
Fino Solomon, I think's out for me, mainly because I think they'll play him forward and outside a bit more. And same as like the Law and even Smiley. Like I know, depending on what they do with their role, if Smiley jumps straight into the midfield, then he's an option. But otherwise, I think he'll probably play. I think Richmond will probably try and develop them while sheltering some of them and actually keep them rotating through different positions to kind of, build some competency without breaking bodies. So I don't know.
Yeah,
we'll see.
So they are. So I that's the thing. That's something I'm watching over the next sort of 6 to 8 weeks, and it's not a question of Levi's ability at all. It's more there could just be a case where there's so many of them, and he just gets pushed out because though he's in that 22, and I'm saying 20 because he's not going to be the sub. It's just more his role compared to the other roles of the other young fellas, and that's no fault of his own. Just the lines of the premiership side.
And that's how I'm using the flex as well. If there's a lot of midfielders that I want to fit in, then I'm using the flex as the person I can't fit in, but I want to. So some of the mix-ups I've had Levi there because I think he'll play most weeks. So I'm like, perfect, I'll put him in that spot. Or it's, Flynn from West Coast as someone who, I'd like to put it in, but I don't want to put him as, say, R2. So therefore, I'm happy to spend up as a value or an expensive rookie sort of option in my flex spot to kind of, get those points on field, but I can't kind of fit them in that rotation as how I would because there is a lot of talent there. So,
for sure.
yeah, leave it's pretty much been 50-50 on my side so far on Levi in flex or Flynn in flex, so
Before we just jump into that back line, because there are the only other one I had outside of sort of the midfields and the forwards was the sort of debate around that second forward position. So Brandon Ryan, who has come from Hawthorn, only played the one game last season, so it's always hard to pick a key forward. But if there's one of them that kind of gets locked in, they're both at sort of basement price where they might get enough of a look in where they can make enough cash. So you've got a case of like Henry Smith, for example, is at 169K, and Brandon Ryan's at 119K. So he's the one in particular because he's pretty well basement. Like, okay, basement this year is 99,000, but at 119K, if Ryan was the one that looks like, and we got the data enough to say, yeah, he's the one playing. And even in that round zero game where before we have to lock our teams in, he was to come out and kick a couple of goals, take a couple of contested marks and get a 60 or 70. Somebody like that's going to be hard to ignore because we know that that spike could be coming by the time we hit round 3.
yeah, I agree, and I think those are the two. Listening to the Raw Deal, they had a podcast where they had Fagan on and talking about how the whole Danaher thing went down because then you think Danaher spoke to him 12 months earlier saying like, hey, if we had have won that game, then pretty much I was probably going to be out, right? And Fagan kept it under tongue, but he did speak with, he said, look, can I share this with obviously, was it Graham Smith, the CEO? Was it
I think so.
and also their recruitment as well? Can I share this with them so they can actually start to get a bit of a planning and heads up? So now it makes sense the fact that they actually wanted Ryan back because Hawthorn didn't want to give up Ryan. Dunstan was going, they wanted Ryan, and then they got Smith as well. So I think they've had now 2 people that they could have in the VFL, learning their system, training with their system, knowing that they'll probably need one of them to stand up. And it always seems dire. Like, people like Hawkins is going out. What's Geelong going to do? Then you had like Shannon Neal pop up and he's doing really well. I'm like, oh no, Geelong will be fine. That's all we need. We just need some games. I mean, Logan Morris just popped up out of nowhere. And now we can't see him out of the best 22. So it's like, is he going to continue with the same flow or a team's going to get a hold of him a little bit more now that they know what he's about? So it is interesting. So for me, yeah, I think Ryan and Smith are probably the 2, but at least they've had 12 months to kind of plan for it. Ryan was actually a Lions Academy player that they didn't choose to match at the time. And then obviously went to Hawks and showed some glimpses. And then the Lions like, oh, yeah, we'd like to get him back. So he is a local boy that, went to Hawks. So it is nice that they kind of, I guess, tried to get him back in and got him back to the Lions. So he's the one I'm probably favoring to more so at the moment.
And I think
We'll
especially
just have to
because
wait
of
and see.
his age too.
Yeah.
Like he's 27.
Yep.
Like he's so it's not like he's a young kid coming in for the first time, and he has been around the footy system for a little while, which does help the fact that he's going to be more developed, able to come in. So that's why I think he's the one. And 119K, like Shannon Neal averaged 58 last year. That's enough to probably put nearly 150K. If not more, on somebody like Ryan. So again, it's so hard to fit so many of these round 3 guys in. But if he's the one, it's such a juicy price that we might have a forward rookie there that we can kind of lock in, who's going to play best 22 footy. But not only that, has one of the best teams in the league kicking to him.
Yeah, that's true. I like it, and they're probably the only real rookie spots available, isn't it? Which is crazy to think when you have a lot of other quality teams. I mean, even Carlton have some rookies coming in with some of their changeovers, but yeah, I think it's going to be exciting. And I think
So
now
just
that
sorry, Ben. So I was just going to say before, like, because obviously we're going to be wrapping up soon, but the defenders, mate. So I've got your boy Zorks, which we need to touch on. I know he's highly priced this season, but he's obviously had the best role in footy last year. And then the two he's heir apparent in Kitty Coleman. And then Tom Doday, just because of the price, and we know if he's fit, they'll probably have him in. Can you just touch on those 3 defenders, mate?
Doday, I think, will probably start off in the VFL and try and get some form up, just because he's done like 2 ACLs now, I'm pretty sure. So he's someone, and they don't need him. So again, Leicester's in career best form. He'll do that role well enough. I'd like to see him and Link McCarthy go into the seconds, get some form, because it does take you a little while to come back from an ACL anyway. Like we saw Rayner, Will Ashcroft, it takes some games. So no matter what, even training, there's no amount of training that can be done until you have full confidence in games and actually rack up some games together. So I think both of those will start off separate. And Coleman's the one though. They said he should be playing in the first Amy series or whatever they call it now in the preseason matches. He's the one I think comes straight back in. They like what he does with the ball. He really sets them up offensively, which then means, okay, well, do you play Zorko and him, or do you play Coleman and say someone else off that back flank line? So it's going to be interesting as to what they do. I think Zorko being an All Australian off that back line, I think I wouldn't be surprised if they actually played him in that role and just go, well, now we've got another good thing coming in. So Coleman, Zorko, you're our offensive weapons. We'll let, Starcevic, Lester, everyone else play some more defensive roles. Even our wings work back quite aggressively. So even if you did have, say, McCluggage and say Wilmot or whoever else, Bailey working hard off that defensive line, Jasper Fletcher works really hard defensively. And I think just going to rotate through. So I'm not sure. And the reason I don't know what Zorko's doing is the reason I'm not probably starting him. I was big props on him when Coleman went down. I was like, bang, Zorko's done it before. Zorko can go in the back line. And then he was the defensive player. So for me, Zorko, he's getting older, but he's super fit. He's super driven. I even wouldn't be surprised if he was just on the interchange and they go, hey, yeah, go play halfback flank, or hey, we'll give a forward a rest. And he might just be that real versatile older player, comes off the bench, goes off the back flank line, tries to create something, comes off, goes into the forward line, gives Levi or gives, someone else a break up forward, and then plays that little sneaky half forward flanker, forward pocket. Kind of like what he did in the GWS game when they were trailing by 40 points. Just go forward, mate, kick a couple of goals, cause havoc, and then come off. So I'm not starting Zorko based on the unknown factor and how do you back up from a career best year. If he had a career best year as a defensive player in All Australian, he's not going to get better, which means that anything you're paying overs because he's going to drop in price. He's not going to replicate it. Doty I'm avoiding because of the double ACL, and I think he'll start in seconds. Coleman's the one for me. We saw in the grand final against the Pies, he just smashed it. He's an offensive player. The good thing is if he does play preseason, you get a couple games to see him there and round zero as well to kind of watch him, the role, the scoring, but scoring potential. He should be someone that can go, I don't think he'll be a keeper, but he could go 90 plus quite easily, quite comfortably. I know people picked him up, looking for 100, but I think he can go 90. He can get you to the second buy, and then if you want to move him, move him. And if he becomes a keeper, he's a keeper. He might go 100, but for me, I think it's 90 or more easily for Coleman. Swizz?
Yeah, I need to see what he does in that, if he's there for round zero and what he does there, which obviously gives us.
He'll be there round zero.
Yeah,
I think he'll be there.
I think he will, but obviously, as we've said, players coming back from those sort of injuries. So I'm not averse, and I'm probably at the moment still leaning towards the idea of I want to see the first 3 weeks and then have him as one of the potential corrections going into round 4. Because if he's there round 4 and he's fit and firing, I want him for the Richmond game for sure. But
pay 300.
There's just a little bit of a concern for me that does he get subbed out early in one of those games if they're looking for some, because Zorko, as the season goes on, is more likely to potentially get subbed off as a 36-year-old. But, just a guy coming back from an ACL, they might just have him in a little bit of cotton wool if they can facilitate that, which that round 2 game just stands out for me, which is the worry. West Coast, if nobody goes down early, I just get worried that Cole. But then in saying that, he could already be on 100 by the time he gets subbed too. So that we've seen that in the past as well. So that's just where I'm leaning at the moment. But we do have a bit of time until we hit that first game.
2 things to finish for me. Number 1, thank you to the AFL for giving us a couple of easier games to start the season. So we don't, they're like, hey, the Lions started at 0-4 or whatever, or 1-4, and things weren't looking great, and there was a premiership, the grand final hangover, and the rest of it. And they go, hey, we can't have that happen again. So we're going to give you West Coast in round 2, and we're going to give you Richmond in round 4 to make sure you at least start 2-2. So I think that's really nice, and we can kind of ease our way into the season, 2-2. Worst case scenario, and then we'll build it and we'll beat all the better teams on the home run. That's just what we do, Swizz. I mean, we chase teams down from 40 plus behind, and and that's just what we do. And secondly, the one person we do need to mention, and we're saving him for last because he has been the number 1 pick that's been chipping away, kind of like a Dangerfield, Petrarca-esque, where they just build in slowly but surely they just build in, mate. And it's Rayner. And my camera might be dying soon, Swizz. But Cam Rayner finished off absolutely hot and heavy. He's someone that, particularly in draft leagues, is someone that I'm looking at in draft leagues. His scope is completely unknown. So it depends on the role. I don't know if he's going to be going pure mid or in the rest of it, because I think they just can't. But he is someone that could just absolutely blow smoke in a draft league and blow it up like he did at the back end of the season. And he's gripped and ready to take the season by storm, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, we always like, and I've said this in the other pods, we always like to look at sort of draft as well, because we know a lot of people play there. And yeah, he might be just one, just because of the other lines taking the focus off. I think more people will be trying to reach for Will Ashcroft, being the midfielder. But yeah, Rayner, with the lack of forward options we have this year, there was a 4-week period where he had a scores of 99 and above. Which this year for forwards would be gold, because realistically it's only Horn Francis that's standing out. So maybe not as much as for Classic, but yeah, if injuries happen, if there was an injury or two that go down around that midfield group, he is the next to go in.
Perfect. Oh, we better wrap this up. My computer's going to die. My laptop's in for a service. I'm using the other laptop, and there's only so many USB-C ports and the rest of it. So that's it. I've got to go before this laptop dies. Thanks for having me on.
No problems, Ben. Thanks for having us on. Thanks for checking us out, guys. As always, like, subscribe, and if you've got a comment about the Brisbane Lions, let us know. Thanks, guys. See you later. Bye.